to the Betsy Mitchell interview. If any of you are unfamiliar, Ms. Mitchell has been a New York science fiction and fantasy editor for more than 30 years, holding senior positions at Bain, Bantam Spectra, Warner Books, and the Random House Publishing Group, where she spent 10 years as vice president and editor-in-chief of Del Rey. She's edited authors as beloved and varied as Dan Simmons, Naomi Novak, William Gibson, Nalo Hopkinson, and Michael Chabon.
You pronounced it correctly. Very good.
I didn't know how it was pronounced until right now.
There we go. We've already accomplished something. An avid champion of keeping the backlist alive rather than letting these books go out of print or be overshadowed by new releases. Ms. Mitchell was also an important influence on Open Road Integrated Media, a promotional platform for new digital releases of backlist titles. Since she's our guest of honor, so you guys want to give her a welcome hand real quick?
Thank you. Should I be using this? Because it's dead. I thought it was here for a reason. Maybe not.
Your decorations.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we can start with a success story. And for aspiring editors, what was the process you followed to become an editor at some of the places you worked for? How did you get started?
I was a journalism major in college, which was at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and started out being a newspaper reporter, actually. So the skills that I learned by being a reporter were writing every day, writing to deadline. Had to learn copy editing in the classes that I took and proofreading, and that was enough when I went to New York to get the beginner job there. That big step is moving to New York, being able to actually go where there's jobs. But it's interesting, the people that we've hired over time at the various publishers I've worked for have the strangest college degrees. It really does not matter whether you have anything related to publishing. You could be a Spanish literature major or a medieval history major. So my major in journalism was helpful, but I don't think it was absolutely required. You just have to love reading. You have to love the genre, and you have to understand the genre, and you can't fake it because they'll figure it out pretty quickly. You really need to have read in it your entire life, which is what I was happy to do.
When you say that opening position that you got once you moved to New York, what was that position?
Actually, the first job that I got was in marketing. It was the only thing I could find at that point. So it was at Dell Books, writing ads for the Yearling book line, which I loved. Yearling did all those great, they did Lloyd Alexander, they did Madeline L'Engle, they did all these wonderful fantasy and science fiction kids books. And so I was able to quite truly say that I loved the books that they did. And I took that job to learn, just to get into publishing, you know, anything to get into the publishing company. And I certainly learned how to deal with marketing people and what the stresses are that the marketing department has to go through. It was very useful to learn how to deal with them later on when I was an editor, trying to get them to do things for me when I turned stuff in late. And it's good to understand how the other departments work because you're inevitably going to end up working with them. So I was very happy to have gotten that job. But then everybody who wants to be an editor starts out as the dread editorial assistant, in which you do anything that anybody else doesn't want to do. At that point, it was mainly reading the slush pile, reading whatever manuscripts came in, and just getting a context for what was good versus what was not good enough versus what you could stop reading after 20 pages versus what you could stop reading after 2 pages. But until you see it in bulk, you don't really get that whole picture of what it's like to deal with being an editor on a daily basis. You also get to know the agents in the business. You start going to publishing parties, and you meet other people your same age, and you meet the young agents who are coming up, and you all kind of grow up together and make a career together. It was fun. It was fun.
So if you could go back to when you just moved to New York and were just starting out, if only we could all just
turning
go
back the hands of time. Yes.
What's the one thing you would tell yourself professionally that would have benefited you the most to hear?
Oh, to hear?
Not necessarily to listen to. You don't listen.
Benefited me the most to hear. Probably that some of these little baby authors that you're just starting out with these days are someday going to be big best-selling people, and everyone should treat each other with respect. I've met some young authors who did not have social skills, perhaps. They didn't know, they didn't realize that they had a long way to go in their career yet, and that they should be polite to their editors and be friendly and not try to act like prima donnas even though you're only on your first novel and you need a lot of help getting to your second novel.
Well, you might just have the one chance to be a prima donna.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And these days it's even worse. You really have one big shot with your first novel because so many publishers now are just signing up 1 or 2 books at a time to see if you do anything, if anything happens with your first book, and if it doesn't, they're just willing to say goodbye. It was easier in the earlier days. We would sign up 3 books at a time because we really wanted to launch these authors' careers. But so I think it's just mutual respect and just knowing that even if I spent most of my day reading bad manuscripts, that some of them were going to turn into great books and great storytellers and make a lot of fans.
Kind of going off of the prima donna thing, what makes an author, for you as an editor, what makes an author a pleasure to work with? What can they do to alienate you?
They can just kick and mutter and bitch and moan, and the editor is your champion in the publishing house. If you are fortunate enough to get to the stage where an editor has put their neck out and said, let's do this book out of all these hundreds of other books that we could possibly do, you're in a very fortunate position. The editor is the person who's going to be your intermediary between you and the publicity department, the marketing department, the art department, the sales department. And you want to keep friends with all of these people. Most of them you're never going to meet. So your editor is the person who's going to be your champion in all of those areas. But a lot of young authors don't realize that the editor also only has so much power. They also think they might be the only author the editor has. This is not true. And everybody, from the editorial to all the other departments, we're all working on a number of different authors at any given time in different stages of the process. And to act as if you're the only person on a person's daily list of things to do, and to demand stuff and complain about stuff and cast aspersions against your editor or publisher early in your career, it's just not a bright idea. Especially with the internet these days, this stuff gets around. And editors talk to each other, and agents talk to each other, and you can get yourself a bad reputation real early on. I've seen people fall out of the field because they just made pests of themselves and didn't get published again. So to flip that over, to be a beloved author, keep your deadlines as best as you can. If we announce your book and you don't deliver your manuscript on time and don't do your revisions on time, it kind of makes your editor look bad. Express gratitude for the things that happen. If your cover art turns out well, even if it's not the most gorgeous thing that you ever could have imagined, if it turns out well, if it looks good, if you're not embarrassed, if you're, if it's suitable to your story, say thank you. It's so nice. When I get thank you letters from authors, I pass them along to the appropriate departments because we need gratitude coming in from, it's just a pleasure to work with people that you know appreciate you. So, be nice. Oh, be nice.
Can you tell us any good horror stories? Not necessarily using names or specifics, but anybody that was really noteworthy in the ways they were difficult.
Oh gosh.
It's a little gossipy, sorry.
Yeah, I can think of a couple of people who just didn't know how to conduct themselves at conventions. They'd get on a panel and they'd start throwing their weight around and just generally acting the fool. And that, again, when you're in a room full of people who might be your fans, if they're not your fans yet, but they might come to be your fans, conduct yourself like a professional author. don't again, don't complain, don't bitch, don't moan, don't act like you know everything there is to know about the publishing field, and start casting aspersions against it. So I've had authors who just don't know how to go to conventions. It's okay if you're not good with people, stay home. That's fine. And these days with the social media being so prevalent, again, if you don't know how to talk in an intelligent, friendly tone with other people, it's probably best, if you can't say anything nice, as your mother used to say, don't say anything at all, because this stuff lives on the internet. I was talking with some other editors earlier who were saying that we've seen careers come and go very quickly. If the person becomes notorious for attracting a firestorm or prolonging a firestorm, if they think their whole persona is being some kind of an online drama queen, that can get you attention for a little while, but it's not good for your long-term career. So agents try to deal with authors. I mean, editors try to deal with authors like this sometimes. And if you're smart, you will listen to good advice from professionals in the field.
What's kind of changing tracks here? What's your editorial process? How much time do you spend, say, on like overarching plot points versus how much time do you spend on a sentence-to-sentence level with the novel?
I don't think we got into the intro that since I left Del Rey at the end of 2011, now I do private editing for clients. So I have a mixture of people who are already published and they want to self-publish a particular project, or I get agents tell me that their regular editors are not really editing them, so they'll bring me the project by a well-known writer and say, please work on this. So it depends on the level of the project that I get. These days I have more time and I can do that with authors if it's necessary. So my main job was to look at the big picture. We had copy editors and line editors to do the more line-by-line basis, but most traditional editors are there to help you, adjust your story so that it's as good on every level as it can possibly be. So characterization, plotting, the big picture stuff. That's what we spend most of our time doing.
It's a little more fun stuff anyway.
Absolutely.
How does your process differ when you're working on a traditional novel versus a graphic novel?
Two very, very different things. I came to graphic novels pretty late in my publishing life. It was great to be able to learn some new skills, but that's a completely different skill set, and I can't claim to be an expert on that at all. Graphic novels are very much like movie scripts. You're basically working with dialogue. The connecting tissue of the story comes out a lot through the visuals. You only have so much room for the little boxes that say 5 years later in Sewer Town or wherever.
Always Sewer Town.
Sewer Town. And so you have to pull together the art and the dialogue so that a complete story is coming through. It's a very different skill.
At your point in the process, then, are you usually looking at scripts, or are you helping them pull together the art? What's already in place when an author comes to you?
I'm not just so everybody knows, I'm not really working on graphic novels anymore. When I was doing it, it was the script would come first, and then the artist would come into the project. And the artist has a huge amount of say as far as how the story was told. The artist could make suggestions as far as the dialogue, as far as the script went. And it's a very organic process, artist and editor and author all working together. Kind of like putting together a movie. Interesting way to work. And as I said, I was glad I got to learn how to do it. But I can see why comic book editors are a completely different breed. And it's cool. It's a cool skill.
So since you've had a hand in we've worked with so many great writers and on so many great projects, out of your entire time in publishing, what project meant the most to you personally, and why?
I'm so glad you asked that. It was a book called Dark Matter. The subtitle was A Century of Speculative Fiction from the African Diaspora. And it was the first ever anthology of speculative fiction entirely by black writers. So I published that when I was at Warner Books, and Octavia Butler was one of our biggest names. I had the pleasure of getting to meet her. At that point, when I got to Warner, which was in the early 90s, her books were still suffering from the cover art syndrome, where even if your character was black, your cover characters were white or possibly blue or some color that could not be identified as black.
Today. That's
Really?
still happening. Yeah.
Sorry to hear that. So we had the pleasure of rejacketing her entire backlist in beautiful new covers, and I could see her sales figures going up immediately. So with Octavia as kind of our tentpole author, I started to bring in writers of color, and finally culminated in meeting the young editor whose idea it was to pull together that anthology and bring it to Warner, and it ended up winning the World Fantasy Award for Best Anthology. But that was a proud thing for me, because I felt like I was making a contribution to the field to encourage all these writers of color. And that was the proof of the pudding. And then the other project that I felt really excited about was the Michael Chabon, which was called Gentlemen of the Road.
Oh, I love that.
He wrote it as it's a little skinny, short little novel that he serialized in the New York Times Magazine. And it's about two roguish fellows on the Silk Road back around the year AD 1100, maybe. There really wasn't any fantasy in it, but because of the time and the place that it was set and the adventures that these two characters had, it had the flavor of fantasy. It had the flavor of a, not like a fairy tale, but like a, like a folk tale or something. And so he wrote the story, and it was my idea to get it illustrated in the old style line art. And I asked Michael what artist he would like to use, and he said Gary Gianni, who is the guy who's still doing Prince Valiant.
Oh, wow.
To this day. And I said, that's a great idea, that's perfect for the book. So I went and found Gary Gianni, and he said, oh my gosh, I'm not sure if I have time for a project like this, but I love Michael Chabon. So it was kind of this love fest where Gary Gianni and Michael Chabon and I put together this beautiful little illustrated book, and it was so much fun. It was a joy from beginning to end to be able to do that one.
Well, it's kind of a dream project when everyone's passions are at the same place. Can you tell us a little bit about your various forays into digital media, and then kind of the question everybody hates, where is the future of publishing going?
So it's very funny, when I went to work with Open Road, and what we do is acquire backlist titles that are not yet in digital form. A lot of these books, the contracts didn't even mention digital rights because there was no such thing in the old days, or there was just no mention of it. But so I went to work for Open Road. My job is to go out and find the estate of the author if they're dead, or find the agent and convince them that they want to go digital. And I didn't even own an e-reader at that point. I figured I'd better get one if I was going to legitimately work for a digital publisher. But it's been a lot of fun. It's a chance for me to reread a lot of classic stuff. Like Theodore Sturgeon was one of the early acquisitions. He's been in print. Most of his stuff is in print, but it wasn't in digital. So I had the pleasure of convincing his agent that we were the place to be, and got to reread all that great Sturgeon stuff. If you have not read his novels, his short stories, I'm sure you must have enjoyed many of them, but the novels are terrific too. Again, Octavia Butler, we published almost all of her books. They just had not been in digital. And it was a great pleasure to be able to republish these authors all at once, like giving the public like 8 or 10 or 12 books. And it was a big event. Like, here we are. Here's all these new books that you may never have seen. And for a new audience who now reads digital, may never have run across the paper versions. And so it was like republishing very famous authors that I never had a chance to work with the first time around, maybe. Never worked with Sturgeon, never worked with Poole Anderson. We have a bunch of Joe Haldeman coming up, or republished people like Pat Murphy, and just a whole bunch. It's been a lot of fun to work on such great stuff. And there's so many books and so many authors out there now, it's all too easy to go out of print. And these books will be lost if we don't keep bringing them back in some form or other. And what was the future of publishing? How can you ask me that? I don't know what the future of publishing is. I wish somebody did.
We'd all be a lot less nervous.
Yeah, exactly. I know that sometimes it seems like Amazon thinks they could take over the entire publishing universe, but there's no way that Amazon could fill in for what the traditional publishers and the small publishers do now. They would have to be publishing 300,000 books a year, and it just cannot be done by them. So I hope they come to some kind of happy agreement where we can all coexist and Amazon does what it does best. The publishers continue to do what they do well. And people do need to make changes. The publishers are keeping a large chunk of digital royalties, which is one of the big battlegrounds. But they have these print side of the business that they have to run. So the money, some of the money they earn from digital goes to support the print side. And my husband, I get into these screaming fits with him. He says, well, everything should just go digital. Everybody can just read the digital forms. And I'm going, no! We don't want to give up the print side. And if we don't want to give up the print side, we have to make sure that traditional publishers can still afford to print these books. And the smaller your print run, the higher your unit cost per book is. And and publishing was never a high profit margin business. If our P&L, if our profit and loss statement for a title broke 12%, that was okay. That was cool. You were allowed to acquire if you were going to show a profit of like 8 to 12%. So there's not much margin to lose any more than that. And ebooks were part of that profit and loss statement. When you're entirely digital, like Amazon is pretty much entirely digital, they have a totally different profit and loss statement. And I'm just not sure they know what a traditional publisher's statement looks like.
What does an author lose when they jump immediately into digital self-publishing rather than starting out with a more traditional path?
It depends on, we all know digital self-publishing success stories. It depends on, I have my theory of 4 pots now. I just came up with it this weekend.
Let's hear.
Do you have enough time? Do you have enough money? Do you have enough social media skills? Do you have enough technical skills? If you've got a lot of money in all those pots, that's great. Do it yourself. If you don't have enough time, it's not a good idea for you. If you don't have enough money, it's probably not a good idea for you because you won't be able to afford to buy help in the marketing or the publicity. If you don't have enough social media skills, you're going to have to either pay for it or go without it. So you have to weigh these balances and decide what's best for you. I'll be talking more about that tomorrow in our panel on, there's a panel on do-it-yourself versus traditional versus small publishers. But it's different for every single person. And a lot of the self-publishing people got into it because they could not break the New York barrier, which I admit is difficult to do. It really is. I really sympathize with the whole process. It can take forever, and at the end of it, it just might not come to anything at all. So I'm happy that a lot of people have found new ways to do it. And by the end of my stint at Del Rey, which was right at the end of the recession, those years of 2009 to 2011 were real hard. And it wasn't much fun to be an editor anymore because you couldn't.
What's different both for you and for the author with that freelance editing versus what you did with a traditional company? Is there anything you really miss about working with the big guys or anything you're particularly glad to be rid of?
You know, they would never let me wear my bunny slippers to work.
A problem across all industries.
And my cat couldn't come with me either. No, I treat the manuscripts that I work on as a private editor exactly the same way I would have at a publishing house. I have more time, actually, to devote to the manuscripts I do on my own. I pretty much take a month. It's certainly not a month of working every day on it, but it's a month. I take a month per manuscript and give it good attention. Whereas quite often at on the job, first of all, you couldn't do it in the office because the phone was always ringing and people were running in and meetings would pop up and interrupt your thought processes. So most editors do their editing at home on their spare time. So now I don't have to try and jam it in on a day home from work. So I feel like I have more leisure, and I can also devote my thinking just to one book at a time rather than spreading it around through several other authors. So it's actually got a lot of benefits, and I can make my own hours, which is great, and it's a lot of fun.
What's you said it used to be you wouldn't accept a project unless it was 95% complete.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still true of your freelance?
No, I would say now that if I feel like a manuscript is 80% of the way there, I can work with the author. There's some that, some people I've told, you're not ready for a professional editor, you need to go to some writers' workshops, you need to take some basic classes in the English language. I try to say that as nicely as I can, but there's some manuscripts I just can't deal with. They're just not to the level where they need me. So I call myself a structural editor. If you have a completed manuscript and you need feedback on it, I will help you look at all the different parts of your plotting, your characterization, your emotional arc, the tone of it, the writing style, and I'll help you pull it all together. But if you're not far enough along there yet, I'm not the person that you need. You need a writing teacher, which is different from an editor.
Are there any particular programs that usually, like when you said some people need to go get a writing teacher or attend a program, are there any workshops or writers programs that when you see it on a cover letter kind of catches your attention or that you feel better about?
Well, Clarion.
Yeah.
Clarion West and there's Clarion East also. Those are those are like boot camps for writers, but that can take a lot of time out of your life. There are week-long writers. That's a good question. Nobody's ever asked me to run down those for them. There's a number of weekend programs, there's week-long programs. If you see that they're run by professional writers, like there's one that up in New Hampshire that focuses on horror, and I can't remember her name. But check out the credentials of these people who run them. Make sure that they're putting out good graduates and that they're run by respectable people. But there are programs, and I will put together a list of them so that next time I get one of these interviews, I'll be more helpful.
You said that it used to be digital rights weren't even provided for in the contract because nobody knew that was going to exist in the future. So you've seen a lot of changes over your time working in the publishing industry. What ones do you think are really positive, and what changes do you kind of lament?
I lament the loss of all the other places you used to be able to buy books. Do you remember going to 7-Eleven and being able to buy a bunch of mass market paperbacks? Do you remember going to supermarkets and finding a bunch of mass market paperbacks? There used to be so many more locations where you could obtain books, and I'm not talking hardcovers, I'm just talking easy reading, like a lot of genre, romance and mystery and science fiction and fantasy, and that whole distribution has just gone away because the various stores realized that they weren't making all that much money off of this particular item, so they just decided to go for non-book items again. And even in the big chains at Barnes & Noble and at Walden, a lot of space had been given over to things like cards and toys, and you've seen it yourselves. Books are not a high profit margin item. And so when you look at it only with a tough mercenary eye as to how much money is going to come out of it, oh, my cute baby. A lot of people who used to carry books just don't do it anymore. So the numbers we used to print on even mid-list authors used to be so much bigger back when there were more places to sell it. So I'm sorry about the loss of that many shelf space, that much shelf space. On the other hand, now digital is filling in at that same price point. You can find so many titles So digital has been a bright spot for everybody in the publishing world. It's a lot cheaper to create it. It's easy to promote if you know what you're doing, and people know where to go to buy ebooks. There's a lot of ways that we can offer them for low price points, like at BookBub or the Amazon Daily Deal. So it's easier now to introduce new authors to new audiences. If you just slap a low price point on something, a lot of people are going to try a writer just to see what they're like. Oh, $1.99, okay, it sounds like something I'd like, I'll give it a try. So there's a lot more opportunity to introduce writers through the digital world. So that's one point that's looking up. I'll think in the back of my mind if I can think of some more positives and negatives.
You mentioned that you used to print a lot more copies even of mid-list writers. Is it still possible for mid-list writers to make a living as writers, or is that not really possible right now?
Mid-list is almost always a dirty word in publishing. You can't remain a mid-list writer. Either you've got to grow, or they're going to let you go and try somebody else. So take every advantage of your situation. When you do get a book for sale through one of the traditional publishers, do everything that they can suggest that you try. Do everything that you can think of just to make yourself known in a non-hard sell kind of way, but in an interesting, here I am, I'd like to get to know you, let's make friends, that kind of a soft sell, just getting yourself known out there. Because mid-list, as always, those writers come and they go. And every publisher is always looking for the next big bestseller. Mid-list is a great place where you can start series. They'll buy book 1 and book 2 of a clever series idea, and if those do well, then they'll keep you around for 5 or 6 more series titles. But if you're just writing a standalone book, it's almost like you're taking a chance these days. The publisher's taking a chance on you, and you're taking a chance with the whole traditional publishing world. So keep your ideas coming. Be ready to turn to a different idea. If your first type of story doesn't work out, be ready to change your name and take on a pen name if you have to. We published at Open Road recently Kate Elliott, which is actually a pen name. She wrote a number of novels which I published back when I was at Warner Books, I think it was. And it was under the name, what was it? Gosh, I can't even remember. Oh, Alice Rasmussen, which is her real name. So she didn't become known until the name Kate Elliott. And we went back at Open Road and republished her backlist in E under the Kate Elliott name, and was able to reintroduce her new readers to those old titles. But we had to use, it was very ironic that we had to use her fake name in order to make them sell. But heck, whatever works.
Would you say it's better to come at genre publishers with like a trilogy in mind than a standalone novel?
I wouldn't necessarily say a trilogy. I would say a series idea, like Jim Butcher's series or like Kim Harrison, where it's the same character but it's a standalone adventure in each book. And if you read them all in order, you can see the larger story arc emerging, but each book is satisfactory and enjoyable just on its own. So that's the kind of idea that I was talking about. Of course, some stories are just not meant to be series. They're great, strong, standalone ideas. And if that's the story you want to tell, then tell that story.
It's almost more like television, these kind of episodic, self-contained units that create a bigger thing. Well, that makes sense. We all love television. What genre tropes and trends, say zombies, dragons, steampunk, what still inspires you? And what do you think maybe writers could take a little break from?
Back in New York, they finally admitted that urban paranormal is dying out. May it rest in peace. But it took years and years and years for that to happen. I would also, I would never say don't write X. One of the most successful authors I ever published was a lady who came in with a dragon story, and her agent said, I have this dragon story I want to show you, and I go, oh, a dragon story. because I thought I'd read every variation on the theme. But then I read Temeraire by Naomi Novik. And she had just taken the dragon story and turned it on its head. For those of you who haven't read it, it's the Napoleonic Wars wherein dragons form air power. So you've got this whole new layer of Napoleonic warfare. But other than that, it's like sea warfare and the land warfare, but now you've got the dragons as well, and it's Temeraire is the dragon, and he's got his captain, and they're friends who form they're in the same wing flight or whatever it was. And she just blew me away with a dragon story, and hundreds of thousands of other readers as well, and ended up being a New York Times bestseller. So I would never say don't write. If you have some brilliant idea for a story and it's really burning in you to write it, give it a try. Don't think that you're not going to get it read just because certain similar things have been done before.
Are there any tropes or time periods or anything you feel like you never see enough of? Kind of the opposite of an overload.
There's so many cultures that haven't been explored yet. I have seen some stories, some fantasies set in Asian type worlds, like Japanese fantasy settings, or Chinese or African. Those stories are new to me. One author that really grabbed me right away was Nalo Hopkinson, who was writing stories using tropes from Caribbean folklore. The stories were set in the near future, but there were spirits and gods drawn from Caribbean folklore. And I've just learned so much about a culture that I'd never been familiar with at all, that I fell in love with her as a writer and published several of her books. I think we have so many worlds right in our own world that haven't been delved into yet. Historical periods, there's so many historical periods that I couldn't name one specifically, like maybe Attila the Hun, the Mongols. There could be a lot of interesting stories that draw, at least from the setups of those cultures. Talking about Kate Elliott again, her Duran series, 4 books, are drawn from the nomadic horse cultures. And so she did a lot of research on that kind of lifestyle and pulled it into a very futuristic setting, set on a planet where the nomadic horse people didn't know that they were on a colony world, and the high-tech, Earth, that's the original settlers had kept it as kind of a test planet or something. They didn't want the people that settled there to know that there was this high-tech culture keeping an eye on them. So she drew from a culture that I was not familiar with at all, and with very interesting results.
What's a project you're working on right now that you're really excited about?
The one project that I'm working on right now?
Tell us all of them.
At Open Road, we're just about to bring out a lot of Poul Anderson's backlist. We have Joe Haldeman coming up, novels of his that had not been in digital before. And personally, the personal editing project I'm doing is interesting. We've seen so much dystopia. This is a utopian story, which you don't see very much of these days, and which kind of drew my interest. But it's it threatened utopia. So it's a villain within the utopia that's going to destroy it if they don't destroy him first. So that was an interesting twist for me.
So who's someone you've never had the opportunity to work with that you'd really like to?
Somebody alive or dead?
Either way, it's different. We're all about fantasy here.
Gosh.
Or kind of a variation on that, infinite budget, infinite time. What's your dream project?
Oh no, my brain isn't that lively right now. I got to work with so many people. It was a wonderful long stretch there. I got to work with people like Andre Norton, who was one of the nicest women I've ever had the pleasure to deal with. Octavia Butler was amazing. I was so happy to have spent the time that I had with her. She died too young. Who would I like to work with? Got to work with George Martin, who's,
He's kind of a dream story. I mean,
Yeah.
he was never obscure, but he was never.
No,
got
he
to go
was.
that
He
long.
used to be obscure. Everybody used to be obscure.
A while the arts books. He's been around
No,
for a
before
long time.
that, do you remember Tough Voyaging?
No.
See, he
There
wrote
we
books
go.
before Wild Card. But I met him while I was working on the magazines, Analog and Asimov. So, but gosh, who would I like to?
You got kind of a great dream answer here. Well, I already worked with everyone. Great.
But I didn't work with everyone. I'm just trying to think of who I didn't get to work with that might have been fun. Connie Willis, I would have loved to publish, but just never came my way. But she's one of my favorite writers of all, and a wonderful person too. Gosh, Robert Heinlein, I enjoyed reading. I don't think I would have enjoyed working with him, but I enjoyed reading him back early on. Shirley Jackson, she would have been amazing.
Oh, yeah.
I would have loved to work with her. Her short stories had a huge influence on me when I was young. And I looked for them like jewels in anthologies. She would have been great. She would have been great.
Well, she's kind of an unusual genre person to have been as a New Yorker, and you know we still love her in genre. This not only Kelly Link, I guess, makes that crossover today. Not many people. Are conventions a very big part of your process, or have they ever been? Like when people talk about networking, you know, which everyone talks about obsessively, what does that mean to you?
Conventions have been great. I highly recommend conventions. When I first started going to them, the first convention I ever went to was after I started working at Analog. I didn't know they existed. You know, coming from Omaha, I just never had the opportunity. There was no local convention. The closest one that I found out about later was Chicago, which is not close. So the first con I ever went to was WorldCon in Boston in 1980, and I come in and the first thing I see is a woman in the rabbit skin bikini holding a dog leash, and the other end of the dog leash was a leather collar around the neck of a brawny guy with very little on. And I was saying, oh, what did I get myself into? And then the next thing I saw was two wild-eyed fans dragging Marion Zimmer Bradley down a hallway because the con had made the ill-informed decision to have a scavenger hunt, in which one of the things you had to drag to the con room was a live professional author. So Marion Zimmer Bradley's like this, being dragged down the hall. So that was my first con.
But you kept going back.
Oh yeah, it's a great place to meet people on a friendly basis like this. You know, don't follow people into the bathroom, but it's great to sit and soak in the knowledge that people can give you. Pick up names of agents or editors that you've never heard of. Talk to other authors. Just find out a lot of names, which is a big benefit sometimes. And just get to know other fans and other writers who are on their way up. It's important to form these cores, these support groups. And as I say, I didn't know when I was growing up with the agents and the other editors what it would all come to. But some of us have been friends for many, many years. When I was young, we formed this group that we used to call Poker Night. And about 10 of the female editors and agents would go out to dinner once a month. We called it Poker Night. We didn't play poker. We just ate and drank, mostly drank. And the remnants of us, the remainders of us who are still alive, still do it to this day. Not every month, but when we get together, we sure have a lot of stories to share and a lot of history to share. And so the networking is vital, and I totally recommend conventions.
And what conventions have just been the most fun? Maybe they're the same ones, maybe they're very different.
No. ReaderCon is an amazing convention. That's the one that's in, I I think it's Burlington, Massachusetts. It's right outside of Boston. And it's in July, and very high percentage of professional writers to attendees. And the level of discourse about literature is very high. But you can, if you are a very literary, if your tastes lean toward the very literary, that's a terrific convention to go to. You can really learn a lot. World Fantasy is similar. A lot of professional writers attend World Fantasy.